to Insight. Today on Insight, Ambassador Tibor Nagy. Ambassador Tibor Nagy was the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs from 2018 to 2021. He was also the ambassador in Addis Ababa, the US ambassador to Ethiopia from 1999 to 2002. He first served in Ethiopia from 1984 to 1986. Ambassador Nagy has served in Africa under different capacities in many African countries. When the war broke out, Ambassador Nagy was the Assistant Secretary of State, and he has extensive knowledge of the war. So today he will explain to us how the US policy has evolved in the last 10 months. Now I take you to Ambassador Tibor Nagy. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me, and it's a delight to be on your show. Although, unfortunately, the subject that we're talking about is a very sad one.
I agree, and actually what I hope is with your knowledge and insight, your love both for Ethiopia, for the United States, we can discuss some avenues how we can improve the relationship between the two countries. I should also say many Ethiopians on social media know how much you like Ethiopia, you love Ethiopia, and I really want to thank you for the love you show for Ethiopia.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. I consider Ethiopia my third country. Of course, I was born in Hungary. My family's there, and I'm now a citizen of the United States. But, Ethiopia is always in my heart, and that's why my heart breaks when we've had this tragedy now since last November.
Mm-hmm. So let me start with a brief status update of the current situation. What is your current evaluation of the war or the conflict in the north, and how is the U.S. handling it?
Yeah, we go back to the day after it started. The United States, then I was, directing U.S. Africa policy, of course, at the State Department. But, at the end of the day, the policy is the president's policy. So other members of the U.S. government are very much involved. We were devastated when the conflict started, and there were some overriding principles that were the most important regarding U.S. policy. First of all, we wanted to end the suffering as quickly as possible. So that was driving it more than anything else. Number two, at the time, we hoped to stop the conflict from being internationalized. Unfortunately, that did not happen with the entrance of, the Eritreans. Number three, very important policy consideration at the time was that there was not a equivalency between the two sides, because on one hand you have what is a sovereign nation of Ethiopia, and on the other side you had a region which was in rebellion. So we had to take that into account. Another one, and I know a lot of your listeners will disagree with me on this, but we did not want to blame the entire TPLF for the conflict, because we looked at the TPLF as a mass party. If I remember, it has about 800,000 members. The TPLF has a long history in Tigray, going back, of course, to the struggles against Mengistu and the Derg. So we were very, we discussed this obviously with the Ethiopian government members that, please do not make the same mistake that the United States made in our initial combat in Iraq, where we just from one day to the next, we made the whole Ba'ath Party illegal, which turned an awful lot of the Iraqis against the United States. And we kind of saw the same situation with the TPLF. The other thing was that we urged the government to please not stigmatize Tigrayans in general, because the last thing that we wanted to see was, for Tigrayans to feel like they are the enemies of Ethiopians. We did everything we could to stop the suffering, to start emergency supplies deliveries. Unfortunately, to stop a conflict like that, you have to get the sides to agree. And at least during my time there, until we finished in January, there was just not a willingness on the sides to agree. One other consideration which we looked at was that Tigray geographically is an extremely, extremely difficult area to control militarily. The emperor was not able to do it. The Derg was not able to do it. So, our belief was that it would be very, very difficult to physically conquer all of Tigray. And as it turned out, of course, that analysis turned out to be correct. Another consideration was that obviously Ethiopia is perhaps the biggest key to stability in the entire Horn of Africa region. If Ethiopia is stable and prosperous, then that stability and prosperity will benefit the entire region. If, on the other hand, Ethiopia is facing instability and other serious problems, that also has a way of impacting the entire region. As everybody knows, the world applauded Prime Minister Abiy after he came to power. He received the Nobel Peace Prize. He made peace with President Isaias. He made many internal political reforms, advanced the political process. So everybody in the U.S. government was really wanting to see Ethiopia succeed. So that was another reason that we saw this very, very unfortunate turn of events as a disaster. And then while Ethiopia itself was going through transition, the United States was also very heavily engaged in trying to help Sudan with its new transition. Of course, Ethiopia had been helpful in that. And Sudan transition was very fragile, as we have seen recently. It's still very fragile. And we very much wanted, along with Ethiopia, we very much wanted to see Sudan succeed and come out from under this very dark shadow that it had been on. As you know, before we left office, we were able to get Sudan off the state sponsor of terrorist list, and do our best to allow Sudan to rejoin the family of nations. So I have to say that those were the forces at play, but the overriding consideration was to bring peace back, to end the suffering. You had to have all of the parties involved willing to engage in some kind of a process to lead back to peace. And during my time there, that unfortunately did not exist. Since then, of course, the situation has gotten even worse. There has been much more suffering. Beyond Tigray, now parts of Amhara, parts of Afar have been impacted. Then there are other peripheral issues involved. Of course, there's always the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. As I tell people, that Ethiopians can disagree violently about 99 issues out of 100, but there's always one issue on which I believe every Ethiopian agrees, and that is the absolute support for Ethiopia's position on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So I'm sorry for that lengthy introduction, but that's kind of the situation.
No, that's very important. Actually, that provides an insight how the U.S. policy has been formulated. Actually, there were a couple of things that caught my attention. One is the issue of internationalization. I believe in one of the press conferences in the last few days of your term, you did mention that TPLF attacked Asmara to internationalize the conflict. And of course, TPLF also attacked, sent missiles to Bahar Dar and Gojem. The other thing, a more important question to me, you raised the issue of stigmatization and or the issue of profiling Tigrayans in Ethiopia. Many Ethiopians believe the United States, particularly, was responsible for the institution of ethnic constitution, ethnic politics. As we know, TPLF was invited to form a government by former Ambassador Cohen, and profiling is part of the constitution. So wouldn't you say the U.S. was, and the Europeans for 30 years, I have participated in so many demonstrations, couldn't see that ethnic politics will end up by alienating the different ethnic groups?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And first of all, the United States was not responsible for ethnic federalism. You know that was a very acute discussion within the Ethiopians who took over from Mengistu. There was, I forgot the gentleman's name, but I knew him when I was ambassador in Ethiopia, who was one of the academics, behind the whole ethnic federalism concept. And, I know the United States is often accused of just about anything that happens in the world. The Americans are behind it at some point. But on this one, this philosophical debate on the type of government.
Mr. Ambassador, if I may interrupt, I know the U.S. did not formulate XYZ. But what I'm saying is the U.S. provided significant support, political, financial support for its institution. I know the idea didn't come from the United States, but there were opposition parties saying that ethnic politics will lead to civil war. But the U.S. was never listening to us. That's what I'm saying.
No, you're right. But one of the things the United States, maybe in the 1950s, 1960s, even 1970s, the United States would involve itself in issues like that. But the last several decades, when it came to internal deliberations on what kind of a government or how to do it, the United States has stayed away from that. I mean, you have seen recently, various heads of state around Africa that extend their constitution, and even there, the United States has been very reluctant to say, absolutely, you should not do that, because there is a sense that, number one, countries are sovereign, and number two, countries at the end of the day have to decide how they want to run their political systems. Those of you, who were inside and discussing, debating at the time, you made your points, other people made their points, and it was an open question. It was a unique experience, which I suspect history will be the judge on one way or the other as to whether ethnic politics works. I teach on Africa, and one of the questions I always bring up to my class is that there is a country in the world where there are three ethnicities who historically have hated each other, but they get along magnificently well in ethnic federalism. And I asked them, I said, okay, do you know what country that is? Belgium? They have never, ever. Pardon me?
Belgium?
You're very close. You've done better than anybody else. Switzerland. And to me, there's a key. The key difference is in Switzerland, the ethnicities divide riches, and unfortunately, in a place like Ethiopia, the ethnicities are fighting over very limited resources.
Yeah.
So it makes the competition so much more acute, and it has a tendency to lead to violence, as opposed to when you have plenty, what you want to do is protect the plenty.
Yeah, but
So,
also Switzerland is a little different because they have 26 cantons and, as you said,
yeah,
three ethnic groups. In
yeah,
Ethiopia,
yeah,
it is like land belongs
yes,
to only a portion of the society. You can't build a country. I don't want to spend a
yeah,
lot of time on there,
yeah,
but I
uh,
also was very much impressed with the first point you raised, the issue of false equivalence, the attempt
yeah,
to build equivalence between a legitimate
yeah,
government and a belligerent group.
yeah.
It looks like the current State Department has retreated from that position. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of interpretation on that because, we put the point up front because we thought it was a very important point. Uh, there is not an equivalency. At the same time, you need to get all of the sides involved if there's going to be a dialogue towards peace, whether or not they're legally equivalent. Um, you know, and if you see some of my earliest public statements on that, we really pushed that because it was very important. In some respects, when this started, I compared it to the United States' own Civil War, when the Confederate forces, in a premeditated attack, fired on Fort Sumter. And, part of the international community, of course, looked at the Confederacy as an equivalency to the United States. But the United States at the time was vehemently strong on the point that there was not an equivalency. I think the current administration, given how the conflict has evolved, I have not heard anything to say that there is equivalency between the two sides. I think it's more the de facto point that to stop the combat, you really need to get everybody involved in being willing to stop.
So another point, maybe you can help us understand. As you know, the Prime Minister Abiy was inaugurated or whatever the word is this past Monday.
Yes.
And he promised he will have a national dialogue that includes even opponents of the government, of course, not the illegal ones, but the legal ones, I assume the legal ones. And the U.S., one of the demands of the current U.S. administration is that there has to be inclusive dialogue. When Ethiopians look at this, when I look at this, it sounds like they are saying the election that was just held is not acceptable. You have to bring in to determine some sort of a power sharing agreement. Am I reading too much into it?
I believe so. Again, I have to say I cannot speak for the current government. So the current U.S. administration. I cannot speak for that. So I only can make interpretations like you do. So I'm not sitting in the conference rooms and hearing what everybody is saying on that. But here's the thing. Ethiopia is such a large, complex country that we Americans have a tendency, unfortunately, to simplify things and put them all together. To be fair, when you look at a country like Ethiopia, you have to look at it as if you were looking at, say, China or India. That while all of these issues can touch each other, you really do have to look at them as distinct issues on their own. That's why when I mentioned the GERD, to me, the GERD is very complex on its own, and you have to see it aside from the northern conflict, even though there's a bit of a touching there. And to me, the elections are exactly the same way, because the elections on themselves were a very major and complicated event last year. And if there had not been a conflict in northern Ethiopia, or if there had not been even the GERD, then I think we can safely say that the elections would have been the major, factor going on in Ethiopia. And from my point of view, having followed Ethiopia as long as I have, I thought the elections were extremely significant. even the recent elections that were held, because in Ethiopia's electoral history, some people look at elections in Africa in a very, very false way. They try to compare it to elections in Iceland, which has had democracy since the year 1000. And to my way of, I look at things realistically. How did this election compare to, say, the election of 2005? Mm-hmm. Of course, it was an improvement. Yes. Obviously, it was an improvement. Yeah. And that's what you have to look at. If you look at it as a snapshot, then you can have all kinds of criticism. But if you look at it as a evolving scale or a process, then you see where you are compared to where you have been before.
Yeah.
So I believe that, right now, I have to say, you take the Congress, you take the media, you take the State Department, other branches of U.S. government. The overriding issue right now is the conflict in the North.
Yeah.
So everything is being seen through that. It's just the way, it's human nature.
I agree with you. I think I will raise the issue of neutrality, particularly from the current State Department. But before I go there, I want to raise one issue you mentioned. That is that you, when you were the Assistant Secretary of State, you told TPLF is a mass party. In other words, it has it has become not only a political party, but an ethnic group, if you will. I think I just want to understand the understanding of that. So does the State Department, I know you don't speak for the State Department right now, does the State Department think that, let's say, the Amara group, one party in Amara or one party in Oromo, represents the whole ethnic group, or is it specific to TPLF?
I don't believe so. I can only speak for myself. Because the TPLF was in power for so long, and the TPLF had such a strong identity with Tigray, that I think in many respects is different, because none of the other regions had a regional party that was purely ethnic based, that had actually ruled the country for as long as the TPLF did. So like it or not, the TPLF was the predominant party in Tigray. Just like I compared it to the Baath party, because some people may not have supported the philosophy, but they said, okay, I live in Adigrat and I want to get ahead, so it's probably better if I join the TPLF. But then, there were farmers who were members of the TPLF who had absolutely nothing to do with the politics or what happened.
Mr. Ambassador, the problem I see is we talked about profiling. When we say one party represents the whole identity group or the whole ethnic group, then the issue of profiling becomes extremely difficult.
Absolutely.
That's the problem of. But I want to go back since you don't have a lot of time. I want to proceed to another issue. The issue of the attack. To your credit, you took to the floor or to the media and say TPLF initiated the war by attacking the Northern Command. Now, has there ever been a government whose army has been attacked and then accepted the belligerent group? What was expected of the government of Ethiopia? Are they supposed to reward the attackers?
No, absolutely not. And you made the same point that I have made, is that the war starts by the attack on the Northern Command. And, at that point, of course, there has to be a response. The problem has been, and I have said before, is a government not supposed to react when it is attacked? How did the United States react to the attack by the Confederate States on Fort Sumner? how did I'm not going to say the attack on Pearl Harbor, because then we have two states, fighting each other.
Yeah.
So I'll take that one back. But of course, governments have absolutely a right to defend themselves. I think where you get into kind of factors is when you start talking about degrees of response. Where do you draw the line in conflict? Conflict has changed so much since World War II. I mean, I'm one of the very few Americans that lived through a war. I lived in a city that was besieged by the Soviet army. My father was a military officer. I saw what dead bodies looked like when a tank ran over them. So I have seen firsthand the horrors of war and not being able to have food. So, as I said, rules of war have changed, and the problem is we can look back, we can analyze, but I go back to I believe this was our overwhelming goal, and I think it remains with the U.S. government is to end the suffering, because the people who are actually firing the rifles is one thing. But the poor farmers whose fields are bombed, or the churches that are destroyed, the women are raped, the people who are starving, they have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, I think we Ethiopians also at large agree with that. As a person who have lived Ethiopia and who really cherish or love Ethiopia, I am willing to admit our political culture is not conducive to negotiations, particularly TPLF in its history has never accepted a negotiated settlement. And they are, and as I said, the structure of the country, this land is this ethnic groups, this land is the other ethnic groups. So nobody is against ethnic, negotiation. But the problem is whether you look at the culture or the fundamental dividing issue between the parties, there is no a clear outcome that one can suggest that negotiation will solve the problem.
I think I absolutely agree. One of my recent, I put out on my Twitter account, I said, okay, how do you people out there see this ending, and when? And I was hoping that I would get something that would be very creative, or would be an idea that I had never heard before. Unfortunately, it was exactly the same thing, that either it's all the criminals of the TPLF, they must be destroyed, or Prime Minister Abiy is the devil incarnate, he has to be driven from power. There was absolutely nothing that indicated to me of a way forward, because my analysis, again, I may be totally wrong, I simply do not see a military solution to this war. The TPLF might think that they want to chase the prime minister out of Addis Ababa and move into Addis Ababa. I cannot see that happening. Hardliners on the other side think that they will absolutely defeat, wipe out the TPLF and physically occupy 100% of Tigray. That is not going to happen. So, so how do we get out of this to end the suffering? So
this brings me to another question, that is the demands of the United States. I want to raise two issues. One is the way it is delivered, particularly by Ambassador Linda Thomas at the United Nations, and former United Nations Ambassador Samantha Powers, is disrespectful to Ethiopia, patronizing. At least Ethiopians look at that. So that doesn't open. They make it like one side is intentionally criminal. They forget the last 27 years. So I want to raise, one is that issue. Second is, for example, the State Department, and in the different speeches, They never raised the issue of the occupied lands of Afar and Amara and the Lalibela church under occupation and all that. So wouldn't the perception of Ethiopians matter? And why are American diplomats do not realize that Ethiopians respond well when they are asked with respect as opposed to by intimidation?
Yeah, you're not going to like my answer, but as I said, I cannot speak for the current administration.
I know.
Having lived in Ethiopia, personally, I recognize the incredible sensitivity to the issue that you raised. With Ethiopians, I'll say not just let's say with all Habasha, the way you deliver a message is sometimes more important than the message itself.
True.
Yes. And I will just stop there. Also, yes. So again, I cannot speak for the current administration.
I know that. Okay,
you need to ask them.
I have a standing offer. I have called the State Department many times. Anybody, respectfully, I would like to invite them to this program.
The only thing I would like to add is, and I know part of this also began human nature. I think there is tremendous frustration on the part of Washington that the suffering goes on and on and on and on. Every image on the TV, and it doesn't matter whether, this is wherever the people live, but if they're suffering, the United States likes to help solve problems. And in this case, I think the frustration is that there's just no ready solution apparent.
So as you know, Ethiopians love the United States. We have migrated to the United States. We have done really well professionally, in businesses. Our culture, our religion has flourished. At the same time, the political decisions, particularly in the last 10 months, the Biden administration seems not to care how we respond or our perception of their policies. They don't reach out to us. They don't communicate with us. But we, Ethiopians and our children, would like to keep the relationship intact. We want to even make it stronger. Would you have any suggestions on how we can improve relationship?
What I would say is, I'm a member of a diaspora myself. I'm a member of the Hungarian diaspora. Mm-hmm. And so I know how that goes, but, I encourage every single Ethiopian to be as politically active as you can be, to engage the members of Congress, to engage the various staffs of the, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and make your views known. I have never known, my friends, the Ethiopians, to be shy in expressing their points of view, but it's political engagement in the United States, as you well know, is extremely important. And as you said, the Ethiopian community has done extremely well. Most Ethiopians who came here, they start out in the parking lots and as you said, driving taxis, and then end up as professionals. And by the second generation, you have the doctors and the lawyers. And so, there's no reason why the Ethiopian community cannot have the political influence that your numbers indicate.
Mm-hmm. Maybe last
and
question,
I have to run off in about 2 minutes.
Okay, just last question. That is, do you think, or what do you think will be the situation in Ethiopia in the next 2-3 months?
I wish I knew. I pray. I pray a lot, and every single one of my prayers, I pray for that peace will come and that the suffering will end. I wish that God would show me some way that we could get there. But we know it's going to end. We know the future. We know it will end. We know that Ethiopia will become again a very prosperous, stable, and important country. It's been around for 2,000 years. There's no reason why it will not be around for another 2,000 years. That it will be a middle-income country. You know, if things happen well, it could be a middle-income country in 10 or 15 years, and that the Ethiopian diaspora around the world, you know, will thrive. So we just need to get there because we know where we're going.
Yeah. Ambassador Tibor Nagy, I really appreciate it. And you have a standing offer to come and discuss Ethiopia anytime you want to. I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you, sir. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. This was Insight from the studios of ESAT at Washington, D.C. Our program has concluded. Until next time, bye.